Walk into any global financial hub, and the narrative is identical. India is the fastest-growing major economy on the planet, the next undisputed global superpower. On paper, the data is flawless, but look at the actual lived experience of the average salaried Indian, and the story changes. For the people driving this growth, the reality isn't a boom. It's a period of increasing financial anxiety, stagnating paychecks, and a feeling that their money buys less every single day. This is because the metrics used to measure India's success have become fundamentally divorced from the structural reality of how the country actually operates. We are witnessing an economic illusion. To see where this is headed, look at the currency. Over the last 14 years, the rupee has lost more than 60% of its value. If we project that same trajectory forward without fixing the underlying structural drains, we are looking at a mathematical path where the rupee hits 150 against the US dollar. To understand why the middle class feels poorer despite the headlines, we have to look beneath the surface of the GDP, at the hidden drains, the skewed data, and the rigged markets that are actually defining the economy. The first issue is India's perceived manufacturing strength. Despite the headlines, we are often just an assembly point. We put the final pieces together, but we lack the deep end-to-end supply chains required to produce the foundational components ourselves. Look at gold. India imports roughly 800 tons of it every year, but we produce only 1 single ton domestically. That means for every gold bar sitting in an Indian vault, the country had to send dollars out of the economy to buy it. This dependency runs through our most critical sectors. We are called the pharmacy of the world, but to make those medicines, we rely on China for nearly 70% of our active pharmaceutical ingredients, the foundational chemicals we cannot produce at scale. Because India is forced to buy these basic materials from the outside, billions of dollars are constantly leaving the system. This creates a permanent drain on the demand for the rupee, steadily eroding its value year after year. Textbooks often claim a falling currency helps exports, but the data says otherwise. Over the last decade, as the rupee plummeted, our exports as a percentage of GDP actually fell. In reality, a weak rupee acts as a systemic tax, making the cost of living more expensive for every domestic consumer. If the rupee is falling and imports are getting more expensive, how is the government's official inflation rate staying so low? It comes down to how we calculate the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. This is the government's official yardstick for inflation, but it's based on a weighting system that hasn't kept pace with modern life. Nearly 46% of the entire inflation calculation is weighted purely on basic food items. For the official data, the price of an onion matters significantly more than the cost of a surgery or a semester of school. Controlling the price of staples is a political necessity for any government relying on the votes of 800 million citizens. If the price of onions stays down, the official inflation number stays down, regardless of how expensive everything else becomes. But the modern middle class doesn't just spend money on food. They are facing skyrocketing costs for diagnostic healthcare and private education, expenses that are either severely underweighted or entirely ignored by the official metrics. The official CPI has become a political tracking tool, not an economic reality. It means the middle class is dealing with a silent, untracked inflation rate that far exceeds the manageable numbers reported in the news. Then there is the collapse of the middle class dream, the hope of working hard and eventually owning a home. Real estate prices in major Indian cities have become completely untethered from the actual salaries and buying power of the people who live in them. This is because prices are being driven by two external forces: non-resident Indians using domestic property as investment portfolios, and massive amounts of black money being parked in apartments to stay outside the banking system. The market is fundamentally rigged against the resident. Only 12% of new housing supply is even categorized as affordable. Meanwhile, more than 20 million luxury units across the country sit completely empty. Housing in India has transitioned from a basic necessity into a financial vault for the elite. The salaried worker is effectively being priced out of their own cities. All of these structural issues are part of a larger mechanism: cross-subsidization. The government uses its resources to subsidize the bottom 800 million people to maintain stability, while the top 1% uses their leverage to hoard wealth in asset markets. The salaried middle class is trapped in the center. They earn too much to receive subsidies, but they don't have enough leverage to influence the policies that are pricing them out. This demographic is forced to absorb the full impact of India's structural failures: stagnant savings, a devaluing currency, and a housing market that no longer serves them. Cheering for a superpower headline doesn't lower the cost of living. That only happens when the country addresses its manufacturing gaps and starts tracking the real expenses of its citizens. Without those changes, the boom will continue to look like growth on paper and a crisis in the bank account.